I used to think maybe if I was just a little more patient, things would fall into place, a little more gentle, a little more forgiving, a little less sensitive, just a little more or maybe a little less depending on what the moment asked of me. And for a while that worked, or so I told myself. I thought love or acceptance or worth looked like learning to carry things quietly. I was good at being the one who understood, the one who made room, the one who didn't take up too much space. And I wore that like a compliment. No one ever asked me to shrink. They just didn't stop me when I did. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being surrounded and still unseen. Smiling across the dinner table, laughing at the right moment, answering messages on time, remembering birthdays, or while wondering if anyone would notice if I disappeared for a while. I never asked. I didn't want to sound needy. Didn't want to make it about me. Didn't want to be the person who turned a small moment into something heavy. So I made everything lighter. I edited myself, swallowed the follow-up thought, softened my tone. Let them interrupt, let the silence swallow what I was going to say. Maybe I was boring. Maybe I wasn't saying it right. Maybe I was just too much. No one ever said those things to me, but I said them to myself in their voices. There's a version of me that got very good at carrying plans, emotions, obligations, other people's mess. And the reward for being so capable was being expected to stay that way. I thought if I could just give more, it would be enough. If I could just hold it together, they'd see it, see me. But being useful isn't the same as being valued. Being tolerated isn't the same as being loved. I didn't leave, not then. I stayed. And in staying, I convinced myself that peace meant silence, even if the silence was eroding me. There was one night, I don't remember what triggered it. Maybe a joke I laughed at, even though it stung. Maybe a glance that skipped over me and landed somewhere else. But I remember sitting there smiling like I always did and thinking, if I stopped showing up, would anything fall apart? And immediately after, would anyone even notice? It wasn't sadness, it wasn't anger, just this sudden stillness. Like something inside me stopped running. People talk a lot about the moment they decided to leave. But for me, it didn't happen like that. It didn't come with a door slam or a dramatic realization. It was more like a quiet uncoupling from something I'd been holding for too long, a loosening, a letting go. I didn't have language for yet, and still I stayed, because it's hard to walk away when you've built your identity around staying, around being the strong one, the stable one, the one who doesn't break, who doesn't ask, who doesn't need. And I'd convinced myself for years that needing nothing was strength. That being easy to love meant being easy to ignore. That if I could just hold the weight a little longer, if I could just smile a little wider, if I could just say it's fine one more time, they'd finally look up and say, I see you, I'm sorry. Let me carry this for a while. But that moment never came, not because they were cruel, but because I kept pretending I didn't need it. And I became so good at pretending, I almost believed it myself. I started mistaking my exhaustion for maturity, mistaking my silence for grace, mistaking my loneliness for independence. And then one ordinary day, I caught myself mid-sentence, stopping a story because someone wasn't listening. And instead of trying again, instead of making it lighter or funnier or more palatable, I just let the moment go. Not in resentment, not in despair, just in quiet. Something in me was done, not with them, but with the part of me that kept waiting to be chosen in rooms where I was barely noticed. I didn't leave that day, but I stopped waiting, and that's where the story really began. Not with an ending, but with a pause, a breath, a quiet moment where I realized maybe I didn't have to carry it all. Maybe I never did. I didn't leave, not yet. But something shifted. I stopped trying to explain myself mid-conversation, stopped double texting, stopped overthinking the silence on the other end. And for the first time in a long time, I heard what the silence was actually saying. Not an absence, not a mistake, but a message. This is how much space you're allowed here. And it was small, so small I had to fold myself, in ways I didn't notice until I tried to stand up again. It's strange how easy it is to convince yourself that crumbs are a feast when you've never had the full meal. When every gesture feels like a gift, even the bare minimum. When the occasional "how are you" feels like a lifeline. When someone finally remembers something you said last month and you treat it like proof that you're not invisible. I used to hang on to those moments like they were enough. I used to believe they meant something was working, that I just had to be a little more patient, a little more giving, a little less expectant. But what I didn't realize was how low I'd placed the bar for being treated with care and how much I was doing to fill the gaps so they wouldn't have to. I would make excuses for their forgetfulness, translate their silence into kindness, call their distance independence, pretend I liked being low maintenance. The truth is, I was afraid that if I admitted I needed more, they would walk away. Afraid that needing something made me too much. Afraid that once I spoke up, the illusion would crack, and I'd be left with the truth that I was easier to love when I didn't ask for anything. And the most painful part is I was right. The moment I started creating space for my own needs, the air in the room changed. Not loudly, not obviously, but subtly. Like a door gently closing that had always been ajar. They didn't say it out loud, but the way they responded to my boundaries spoke volumes. The discomfort, the confusion, the quiet pullback, as if they were grieving the version of me who gave more than she had. The one who filled in their blanks, the one who cleaned up the emotional mess and didn't ask for anything back. But I had started to notice, not in anger, but in clarity, how I was always the one to follow up, the one who remembered, the one who reached out first and second and third, the one who turned their hurt into a story I needed to fix. And suddenly I didn't want to fix it anymore, not out of spite, not out of bitterness, but because something in me had grown too tired to keep chasing what never came freely. They used to say, "You're so strong. You're always so grounded. I don't know how you handle it all," and I used to smile, but I don't think they understood. That being strong is lonely when it's expected. That being the stable one means no one checks on you. It's a trap the praise that keeps you silent. Because once you break down, people act like you've failed them, as if your exhaustion is an inconvenience to their comfort. I carried a lot, not just for others, but of others. Their insecurities, their projections, their unmet needs. I let them hand me what they didn't know how to hold. And I called it love, but it wasn't love. It was self-erasure, dressed up as care, rewarded with access, but never with real closeness. There's this quiet grief that settles in when you realize you were only valued for what you could carry, not who you were, not your softness, not your presence, just your usefulness. And once you stop offering that, you become disposable. That was the fear I never said out loud, that if I stopped performing, they would stop pretending. And maybe that's exactly what happened. I used to think being someone who didn't need anyone would make me cold, detached, hardened, but I was wrong. What it made me was honest about what I actually wanted, honest about how little I was getting, honest about the effort I was pouring into places that only took but never gave back. And yes, it made me quieter, but not bitter, just clearer. Like fog lifting, like seeing your own reflection for the first time after months of distortion. I didn't announce anything, didn't make a speech, didn't throw the past in anyone's face. I just started saying less, started replying slower, started letting silence be silence instead of rushing to fill it. And slowly, I watched things fall away. The conversations, the invitations, the convenient connections that only worked when I did the work. At first, it felt like loss, but eventually, it felt like relief. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally stopped begging for a place I was always kneeling to fit into. And that's when I realized, maybe I was never afraid of being alone. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd see when I stopped performing. And maybe, just maybe, it was never really love if I had to disappear to earn it. Peer. I don't know when I stopped waiting. Not in a dramatic slamming the door kind of way. It was quieter than that, smaller. So small I didn't even recognize it as a decision. I just stopped checking my phone so often. stopped rehearsing conversations in my head, stopped trying to figure out what I did wrong when the reply didn't come. At first, it felt like giving up, like I was failing at something connection maybe, like I was letting something fall apart that I should have tried harder to hold together. But over time, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like release, like my hands had been clenched around something for so long, I forgot they could open. And when they did, I didn't feel empty, I felt light. It turns out you can only wait in doorways for so long before it starts to feel like begging. And I had been standing in emotional doorways for years, holding space, making room, keeping the light on, waiting for someone to turn around and say, "Thank you for staying. I see how much you're holding. You can rest now." That moment never came. And eventually I realized maybe it was never going to. Not because I wasn't worth it, but because they were never really looking. The truth is, people notice when you stop showing up for them, but they rarely notice when you stop showing up for yourself. And I had stopped showing up for myself a long time ago. In ways that look like kindness, in ways that were easy to miss even for me. I showed up for their stories, but not for my silence. For their needs, but not for my own. I gave grace, space, understanding, all the things I rarely extended inward. And when I finally stopped waiting, when I stopped fixing, stopped filling in the gaps, there was this strange stretch of time where nothing happened. No one asked why I'd grown quieter. No one asked what I needed. They just adjusted to my absence, to my stillness, to the version of me that wasn't bending anymore. And it hit me not all at once, but in small, disorienting waves that they had never really seen me. Not the real me, just the role I played. The version that said, "I'm fine," before they even asked. The one who smoothed things over, who made things easier, who never asked to be met halfway. I kept thinking I was being selfless, but now I wonder if I was just afraid. Afraid that if I stopped giving, there would be nothing left between us. And maybe that's exactly what happened. Because once I stopped pouring, the well ran dry. And I saw maybe for the first time that I'd been keeping things alive that were already gone. I used to think relationships ended with conflict, but now I know sometimes they end with quiet. With one person choosing to stay silent and the other choosing not to notice. There's a kind of pain in that, sure, but also, strangely, a kind of peace. Because when you stop trying to be heard in places that never listened, you make space to hear yourself again. And that voice, my voice, had been buried for so long, beneath apology and performance and hope, that I barely recognized it. But it was there, soft, clear, patient even after all this time. It said, "You don't have to keep proving your worth. You already know." And that was the turning point. Not leaving, not walking away, but no longer justifying my presence, no longer chasing what wasn't reaching back, no longer clinging to dynamics that needed my silence to survive. It's strange how invisible you can become to people when you stop playing the part they're used to. When you stop laughing at the jokes that hurt, stop agreeing out of habit, stop softening truths that deserve to be sharp. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter. I just didn't have the energy to participate in my own erasure anymore. And that was when the loneliness changed. It didn't leave, but it became mine. Not something I suffered under, but something I sat with, like a quiet guest, like an honest friend. Because loneliness is loudest when you're surrounded by people who don't really see you. But when you're alone, truly alone, and you're finally listening to yourself again, it's not emptiness, it's space. Space to ask different questions. Not why don't they care, but why did I stay so long? Not what else can I do, but what happens if I stop? And what happened was quiet and necessary, and the beginning of something I didn't know I needed. Distance, not to punish, not to make a point, but to breathe, to rest, to remember who I was before I started translating myself into something more acceptable. I didn't tell anyone, didn't send a long message, didn't make an announcement. I just stopped performing, and almost no one noticed, which told me everything I needed to know. There was no big moment, no confrontation, no outburst, just a slow, steady unthreading. I began to put things down, not dramatically, not with resentment, just without apology. The texts I used to send to check in, I didn't send them. The emotional messes I used to quietly clean up, I left them where they landed. The apologies I used to make for other people's behavior, I let the silence speak instead. It felt strange at first, like abandoning a post I'd assigned myself, like watching a house leak and deciding not to catch the water anymore. But I realized something. It was never my house. It was never my responsibility to hold it all together. I had just gotten used to standing in the gaps, patching holes no one else acknowledged, and for what so, things wouldn't fall apart, so no one would be uncomfortable, so I could keep telling myself I was needed. There's something almost addictive about being the one who makes everything okay. You get to feel strong, capable, indispensable. But the cost of being indispensable is this. No one thinks to ask if you're okay. They just assume you are. Because you're always the one who adjusts, always the one who bends, always the one who catches what they let fall. So when I finally let things land where they may, there was a noticeable shift, not in volume, but in weight. Things began to fall. Conversations that only existed because I held them up. Relationships that only functioned because I did the emotional labor. Moments that used to feel familiar now felt lopsided. Because they were, and maybe they always had been. I was just too busy holding things together to notice how unbalanced it really was. I used to think that love meant effort, that if I cared enough, I could fix what was broken, heal what was hurting, fill in what was missing. But I've learned something. Since love doesn't mean becoming a version of yourself that's easier for others to love. And healing doesn't come from bleeding quietly to keep the peace. So I stopped offering explanations that no one asked for. Stopped trying to soften every truth to make it easier to swallow. Stopped stepping in every time someone stumbled as if their balance was my job to maintain. And in that space, in the absence of my effort, I saw what was really there, what was real, what was mutual, what was only surviving because I was feeding it with everything I had. The friendships that only reached out when I did. The conversations that died the moment I stopped asking the questions. The people who said, "Let me know if you need anything," but never once looked close enough to notice I already did. It wasn't anger I felt. Not even sadness, really. It was clarity, a kind of quiet knowing this is not where I'm met. And once you realize that, once you really feel the difference between effort and reciprocity, you can't unsee it. I started making different choices, not loudly, just honestly. I stopped going to things that drained me, stopped replying out of obligation, stopped trying to prove that I was worth staying for. Because the truth is, if someone only values you when you're doing something for them, they don't value you. They value the function you serve, the ease you provide, the comfort of your emotional labor. And when you remove that labor, when you step out of that role, they don't just miss you. They resent the absence of what you gave. And sometimes they punish you for taking yourself back. They call you cold, distant, selfish, but what they really mean is, you're no longer convenient. You're no longer disappearing for my comfort. You're no longer making my needs more important than your own. And that's fine, because I wasn't leaving in anger. I wasn't trying to make a point. I wasn't hoping they'd chase me down. I was just tired of carrying what wasn't mine, tired of trying to fix things that didn't want to be healed, tired of shrinking myself to be digestible, acceptable, tolerable. There's a quiet kind of freedom that comes when you stop asking, will they be okay without me? And start asking, will I be okay with me if I stay? And my answer finally was no. I wouldn't be okay. Not if I kept holding things that hurt me just to protect people from feeling the weight of their own actions. Not if I kept explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. Not if I kept breaking myself into pieces so they could feel whole. So I stopped. Not to teach anyone a lesson, not to be missed, but because I was finally ready to live without pretending it didn't hurt. I stopped fixing, stopped absorbing, stopped offering myself as the emotional cushion to every sharp edge. And yes, some people noticed, but not the way I thought they would. They didn't say, "I'm sorry I let you carry so much." They said, "You've changed," And maybe I had, or maybe I was just finally becoming someone who no longer mistook sacrifice for love. At some point, the shift became visible, not just to me, but to them. The people who once relied on my silence, my flexibility, my endless yes. They started noticing that I wasn't so reachable anymore. Not unreachable, just different, less eager, less immediate, less available in ways I used to believe made me good, likable, safe. And they didn't know what to do with that. At first, there were little comments. Is everything okay? You've been distant. You're acting different, not concerned, more confused, like something they used to depend on had quietly gone missing. And in a way, it had. Not me, not my warmth or my care, but the version of me who blurred the lines between being kind and being convenient. Because now I was saying no, and not explaining, not softening, not apologizing. I was setting boundaries and not asking if they made anyone uncomfortable. For most of my life, I treated boundaries like negotiations, as if I had to present them in the perfect tone at the perfect moment, with just enough softness so no one would feel rejected. And even then, they were often ignored, pushed back, laughed off, because I didn't really believe I was allowed to have them, because I wasn't consistent, because I kept opening the door again when someone knocked loud enough, because I was scared of what would happen if I held the line. But now, I wasn't scared, I was tired. And when tired turns into clarity, something sacred happens. You stop waiting for people to understand your boundaries. You just build them and live behind them with peace, not as a fortress, but as a home. Some people pushed back, of course, not all at once, but in subtle testing ways. The late-night calls that used to go unanswered only once now stayed unanswered. The sudden "I need you" messages met with silence if they came from people who never once asked how I was when I didn't have something to give. The guilt trips, the subtle digs, the quiet punishments for not being as available. But here's the thing. When your peace becomes louder than your fear, you stop taking those reactions personally. You realize that people conditioned to access you freely will always see your boundaries as a betrayal, and you let them. You let them think what they need to think, feel what they need to feel, because you're no longer shaping yourself around the edges of their comfort. I didn't need them to understand anymore. I didn't need permission to change. I didn't need validation for choosing myself. What I needed was to stop betraying myself to avoid disappointing others. So I said no, without guilt, without performance. Just no. No to last-minute favors. No to emotional unloading that only went one way. No to being the emergency contact in lives that didn't check in on mine. And I said yes too, but carefully, intentionally, from a place that wasn't about earning a seat at the table, but about choosing which tables I even wanted to sit at. There's something powerful about becoming unavailable in the ways you used to believe made you worthy. Something healing about watching people adjust to your absence and realizing the world doesn't fall apart. And if it does, it was never your job to hold it together. I used to think boundaries would isolate me, that I'd end up alone, misunderstood, unloved. But here's what actually happened. The noise stopped, the chaos settled, the people who only loved me in my softness disappeared, the ones who loved me through my silence fell away. And what remained was quiet, but it was mine. I had space again, to think, to breathe, to not be constantly managing other people's reactions. And slowly something unexpected began to return myself. Not the version of me they wanted, not the polished agreeable endlessly giving me, but the real one, the one with needs, with limits, with an inner world that didn't exist just to accommodate others. I wasn't performing anymore. I was living. And the people who could meet me there without needing me to shrink, they stayed. Not many, but a few. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. There's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up quietly in the choices you make, the energy you preserve, the peace you no longer trade for temporary approval. That's where I was now. Not angry, not resentful, not even sad most days, just still, clear. No longer available, to be everything everywhere for everyone. And that felt like freedom. At first, I didn't expect anyone to notice. I had left quietly. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. I had stopped showing up in all the invisible ways I used to. No more checking in first, no more smoothing tension, no more reaching out when things felt off, and for a while it was just silent. Then slowly they started to notice, not with apologies, not with insight, but with confusion, with defensiveness, with discomfort that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with how I no longer behaved in ways that made them feel safe. I got messages like, "Are you mad at me? You've changed, you don't seem like yourself lately." And I read them without urgency, without guilt, without the familiar rush to reassure. Because I had changed, and it wasn't a crisis, it was a return to myself after years of being shaped by the fear of losing people who only stayed because I never said no. Some reached out more than usual, trying to reconnect, trying to test if the old version of me was still in there somewhere, the one who would drop everything to fix what they neglected. But I didn't answer right away. And when I did, it wasn't the version of me they remembered. There was no edge to my tone, no performance of calm, just simplicity, short replies, long pauses, honest distance. And I think that unsettled them more than anger ever could. Because I wasn't fighting, I just wasn't fighting anymore. That's the part no one prepares you for. When you stop defending your peace, because you're finally living inside it. And once you're there, you don't need to explain it to anyone who tries to pull you out. I used to want them to understand, to wake up one day and say, "I see what I've been doing. I'm sorry I made you carry so much. I didn't know you were hurting." But the truth is, some people don't see it until you're no longer there to absorb it. And even then, what they miss isn't you. It's the version of you that made their life easier. And I wasn't interested in being missed that way. I didn't need to be someone's absence to be valued. I didn't want to be recognized by what I used to give. I wanted to be seen for who I am not, for the space I once filled in their chaos. And so when they asked, "Where did you go?" I didn't answer, not because I was punishing them, but because the real answer wasn't for them, it was for me. I left the moment I realized I was always the one staying. I left the minute I stopped translating their neglect into something noble. I left when I finally understood that silence wasn't respect, it was dismissal. And even then, I didn't slam any doors, I just stopped propping them open. The reactions came in phases. Some people got quiet. Not out of respect, but out of confusion or maybe guilt. Others got loud, accusatory. They needed me to be wrong for choosing myself, because if I wasn't, then maybe they had to look at what they had done with the version of me who never asked for anything. And then there were the few who tried to come closer, tentatively, differently. Not to fix it, but to sit in the discomfort of what they hadn't seen before. And to those few I listened, softly. Not to start over, but to meet each other honestly from where we now stood. But for the rest, I didn't chase, didn't over-explain, didn't try to make myself understandable in languages I no longer spoke. Because that's the thing about healing, it's not loud. It doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it just looks like choosing not to reply. Like not defending your silence. Like trusting that the people meant to stay won't require you to bleed clarity for comfort. I thought I'd feel alone. I didn't. I felt still. And in that stillness, I began to remember parts of myself that had been waiting in the background. Not the strong one, not the wise one, not the endlessly giving one. Just me. Unedited, unobligated, whole even in the quiet. I didn't need the last word. Didn't need closure in the form of regret. Didn't need the dramatic moment where they realize what they lost. Because what they lost was someone who used to lose herself just to stay connected. And I had finally stopped losing. People think leaving means everything changes, but most days, life looked exactly the same. The same morning light spilling through the blinds, the same grocery list on the fridge, the same walk to work, the same quiet moments at night, brushing my teeth, folding towels, boiling water for tea. But something had changed. It wasn't visible. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. A kind of stillness inside me I hadn't known in years. There were no more internal negotiations, no more asking myself whether I was overreacting, no more rehearsing how to say something in a way that wouldn't make others uncomfortable. I no longer needed to earn rest, I just rested. No longer needed to apologize for space. I simply took it. No longer needed to shrink for someone else's comfort. I let myself take up room, and I didn't explain, didn't document, didn't defend it, because I wasn't asking to be seen anymore. I was seeing myself clearly, fully, for the first time in years. I didn't become someone new. I didn't reinvent myself. I didn't rise from the ashes. I just stopped abandoning who I was every time someone else preferred a softer, quieter, more convenient version. That was the real shift. Not what I added, but what I stopped removing. I no longer smiled when I didn't mean it. No longer said it's okay when it wasn't. No longer kept the peace by disturbing my own. And slowly the world around me began to respond. Not always kindly, not always fairly, but truthfully. Some doors closed for good. Not because I slammed them, but because I stopped holding them open from the other side. And I let them close. Because for once, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was more afraid of being surrounded and still feeling like I had to disappear to belong. And it's strange how full a day can feel when you're no longer spending it performing. How quiet your thoughts become when you're not editing them for someone else's approval. I used to think freedom would feel loud, big, uncontainable. But for me, it felt like eating slowly, breathing fully, sitting on the edge of my bed in the morning and not feeling dread. Freedom felt like not bracing myself anymore, like walking into a room and not scanning it for who I had to be. I didn't want revenge, didn't need anyone to wish they'd treated me differently. I didn't even want an apology anymore. What I wanted was distance, not from people, but from the version of myself who accepted so little and called it enough. And that's what I gave myself. I didn't announce it, didn't post about it, didn't turn it into a project. I just withdrew my permission for the world to shape me, for anyone to reach inside me and rearrange what I believed about my worth. And the grief it came, not just for what I lost, but for all the years I spent thinking I had to be less just to stay close. But grief didn't drown me, it moved through me, and then it left, and I remained. Not triumphant, not unshakable, but real, present, home. I realized the most radical thing I ever did wasn't leaving, it was staying with myself. When no one else knew how, when I didn't even know how, and now I do. I know how to choose peace even when no one else understands why I'm stepping away. I know how to sit in discomfort instead of rushing to fix it. I know how to say no without guilt trailing behind me like a shadow. I know how to protect my softness, not by hiding it, but by not handing it to people who only know how to take. And that doesn't make me hard, it makes me whole. People still say you're different, and I suppose I am. Not because I've become something else, but because I've stopped trying to be what I never was to begin with. I no longer rush to be understood. I no longer water myself down. I no longer reach toward places that never reached back. And what's left is simple. Quiet mornings, honest friendships, clear boundaries, full breaths. My own reflection, steady now and finally familiar. I don't need anyone to see what I lost to get here, because I see it. And more importantly, I see who I've become because of it. They didn't see it coming. I suppose I don't blame them. I had stayed for so long, smiling, showing up, making things easier than they deserved to be. I had softened every edge, apologized for every silence, smoothed over every crack. So when I left, truly left, it felt sudden to them, abrupt, unfair even. But what they didn't see was how long I had already been gone. How many nights I sat in the same room with them, feeling 1,000 miles away. How many times I'd rehearsed leaving, not out loud, but in the quiet corners of my mind. How many parts of myself I had already buried just to keep the connection breathing. They were shocked. They called it a change. They called it cold. They asked, why didn't you say anything? But I had, not in ways they were willing to hear, not in anger or accusation, but in the slow withdrawal of myself, in the questions I stopped asking, in the stories I stopped telling, in the way I stopped waiting for them to look up and notice me already fading. The truth is, I left long before they noticed, not as revenge, not to be dramatic, but because something inside me had gone too quiet to keep pretending. And what surprised me most wasn't that they were shocked. It was that I had waited so long. So many second chances, so many moments where I told myself to hold on just a little longer. So many justifications, so many internal negotiations between what I deserved and what I was willing to tolerate. I had been loyal to my own abandonment. That was the hardest truth to swallow. And still I grieved, not just the people, but the version of me who stayed, the one who kept reaching for connection in places that couldn't hold it, the one who believed that love was something she had to earn. I wanted to hold her. Tell her she did the best she could with what she knew. Tell her it's not weakness to want to be seen. Tell her she never had to disappear to be loved, but she was still lovable even when she did, because she got me here, to this place, to this clarity. And I don't hate where I came from, even though it hurt, even though it hollowed me out before it filled me back in. It taught me the weight of silence, the price of shrinking, the subtle violence of being useful instead of whole. And now I know better. I know what peace feels like, not as a reward, but as a right. I know what real presence feels like, not performative, not strategic, just honest. I know what love feels like, not the kind I chased, but the kind I allow. The kind that doesn't ask me to prove, or shrink, or vanish. I live differently now, not louder, not harder, just truer. I don't explain my absence. I don't defend my boundaries. I don't wait for permission to rest, to retreat, to realign. And the people still in my life, they don't need me to. They meet me where I am not, where I used to bend to be. They listen when I speak, not just when I agree. They offer space not because I demand it, but because they respect it. And sometimes when I pass by the places I used to shrink, I feel nothing. Not pain, not pride, just a quiet distance. The kind that only comes when something no longer holds power over you. They were shocked I left, but they didn't see the long quiet leading up to that moment. Didn't see the years of erasure, the repeated silences, the heavy compromise. Didn't feel the cost because I paid it silently in full. And I was shocked too. Not at what they did, not at what they failed to do, but at how long I stayed after I knew. At how deeply I had convinced myself that holding on was a virtue, that self-abandonment was love, that disappearing was noble. But now I know better. I don't need to be strong in the way I once did. Don't need to hold what others drop. Don't need to earn a place where I already belong or never did. And leaving it didn't fix the past. It didn't make them see. But it gave me back something they could never give myself. Not the polished version, not the agreeable version, not the one who made everything okay, just me, in full color, in quiet knowing, in a life that no longer asks me to vanish in order to stay, and that's enough.